Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition of Charts Today comes to you from London. And we're about to have 4 days off for Easter, but markets are falling back basically on Trump's comments last night. And we're seeing crude oil pushing higher. This is the rolled chart now, so the targets will be slightly affected because we did have that rollover into the new contract for the month. This is the actual contract. We've got targets pushing higher, and significantly targets on WTI, which is the American crude oil, and that will not be popular in the US. That gap between Brent and WTI has closed down to about $1.50, which is what we normally expect to see. So we've got targets there at 117. So we're seeing prices heading back to that sort of 120 level. And we've still got the very big upside targets on the daily chart. European gas prices are falling back this morning. We were up 7% at the open, but that's coming back. And our morning call report out to our institutional clients this morning was neutral. So looking at what's going on in the main markets, we look at the dollar. The dollar index is running flat, and realistically we're trading now in a range of around 99.100 on the very short term, so not much going on in currencies. If we look at Bitcoin, that's down 2% this morning. There were some upside targets not met. We don't expect counter trend targets to be met. Do watch my free resources on the updated website on targets and how they work, but we discount upside targets in downtrends, and so no big surprises there. Looking at the daily chart, we do have these downside targets, so the prevailing trend is lower, and it does look like the 60,000 level, which was the spike low in February, will almost certainly break in the coming weeks based on this chart. Remembering that the medium term daily chart is, we're thinking weeks and maybe 2 months ahead. Now, stock market indices fell quite heavily yesterday. So they bounced yesterday, and then of course Trump's comments came after the close in the US, but we're seeing the futures down this morning, down over 1%, the Nasdaq future down 1.5%. That downside target is a continuation. Even though we've bounced, you have to remember these moves are counter trend. We're below the cloud. That means we're bearish on the medium term, weeks and maybe 2 or 3 months ahead. So that's the time horizon thing, which by now you'll know is a big factor in looking at charts. We're seeing the UK market is fairly flat. We're seeing the German market down 1.5%, and Asian markets were pretty hit. I mean, they've closed now for the day, but we've seen big sort of falls in Asia. No big surprises there. The Sensex continues to fall in India. We did spike lower in the last move there, but it's in free fall basically. Australian market falling 1%. Holding that support level, but things are not looking great in Australia. Big dependency on Middle Eastern crude. We have got some upside targets, but again, we are below the cloud on that daily chart, so we just do need to be aware of that. Looking at gold, that's fallen back a bit, down 2.5% this morning on the daily chart. You can see here the big question for gold is, can we break higher above 5,500 or lower below 4,000? And this is the big question mark. We've seen a lot of people selling gold for liquidity reasons. The upside target's not quite reached, which is again a little bit of a bearish factor. If you watch my videos on the targets, the fact that you don't quite reach an upside target is a kind of a bearish confirmation, and we're seeing fall away there. And if you're trading gold, do look at the 1 minute charts. That's where you're going to get the earliest targets. Silver has been hit more heavily today, down nearly 5%, and we can see here that the target was not quite met, and then we fell away. So really quite interesting there. We are just holding cloud support, but for the moment it's not looking great. Looking at bonds, first of all, let's have a look at bond yields. The US 10-year that has that bounced 1%. So we're still seeing bond markets spooked in the US, which is obviously the main market. So US Treasuries under pressure again. The UK market, again, we're running to that upside target, bouncing this morning, nearly 5%. And if we look at the German bond yield, up nearly 1% as well, and that's now over 3%. So that's a pretty important number. And of course, Japan is also quite key there as well. Now, looking at the tech majors, Microsoft was down when most other stocks were bouncing yesterday, highlighting the inherent weakness that Microsoft has. And so that's really quite key there as well. So we are seeing a move lower. Tesla did bounce yesterday, but the reality is those downside targets have nearly met, and we are bearish below the cloud. And so, we are seeing stocks really coming under pressure. Again, the future's down 1% in the US. Looking at the Dow, we had a strong performance on the Dow, remembering that the market closed. We saw a very big move in Nike. So that was, again, a big bounce down, but don't be surprised to see big moves to the downside in downtrends. Bad news happens in downtrends. That's what happens, and that gets used to it. Chevron was down 4.5%. That's probably overdone given the price of oil, so we're likely to see a bounce there on Chevron today. And if we look at some of the stocks like Oracle, they've more than halved in the last 6 months, and made a big announcement on redundancies this week, and really just their debt burden is increasing, and that's showing up in the target. So your first target on Oracle was back, when we were at literally $280, and now we're sitting at 135. So they've halved from when those targets were given and we crossed below the cloud. So you really cannot ignore the trends. Now, looking at the FTSE, just looking at the NASDAQ first of all, the best performing stocks yesterday, well, the worst performers were not so heavily down. We saw big bounces yesterday because of that euphoria, but then, of course, Trump's announcement came in later in the day. And if we look at the charts there, we see Micron had stellar results like Nvidia, just failed to hold a new high and falling away. And again, if we look at the 60-minute chart, you see the downside targets kicking in below the cloud on the 60-minute and just testing the cloud on the daily. But a lot of people raving about these stocks. The reality is we saw chip makers up strongly yesterday, but we will not be surprised to see a lot of that unwinding again today. Last of all, a look at the UK market. No big surprises here. The best performers are the crude oil companies. So we're seeing BP up 4%, Shell up 3%. And basically the targets have been exceeded, which is also bullish confirmation. This is the shorter term chart for Shell, holding that short term trend above the cloud. Again, we discount the downside targets because they counter trend. Really quite key there. So we're seeing a lot of stocks. The UK market has been really held up by the oil majors, which forms a big weighting in the UK index. Now, we are seeing quite big sell-offs in some of the resource stocks. We see Fresno down, Antofagasta, Anglo American still holding the cloud, but we are seeing quite a move there. EasyJet, no big surprises there. Jet fuel, falling to new lows. IAG, same thing. It was below the cloud before this crisis broke out of the Middle East. So again, it's going to be worse for the price in a downtrend. Anyway, that's it for today. It is Easter. I will be back on Tuesday, a few days off yacht racing, which I'm looking forward to. Have a happy Easter and hang in there. Markets are going to be challenging for some time to come. Bye for now.